Pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong are now in their fourth month. This weekend, demonstrators carried American flags and sang a familiar anthem.
And rise us through the perilous fight.
Protesters sang the Star-Spangled Banner Sunday as thousands marched to the U.S. consulate. Some carried signs calling for President Trump to, quote, liberate their city. A mix of peaceful and violent protests have clogged Hong Kong streets for 14 straight weekends as demonstrators demand democracy and more rights. Isaac Stone-Fish joins me now on set. He's a CBSN contributor and senior fellow at the Asia Society. Isaac, thanks so much for being with us. Pretty extraordinary to see and hear the American flag and hear the Star-Spangled Banner being sung there. One can only imagine what that must sound like to Chinese authorities. But what exactly are protesters trying to accomplish here by calling on the U.S. to intervene?
So protesters have already got one of their 5 demands, which is the removal of a controversial bill that would allow Hong Kong to extradite suspects to the mainland.
That's what started the whole thing.
Right, exactly. And they really want Hong Kong to have more autonomy. It's under the relationship between Beijing, it's one country, 2 systems. And a lot of people in Hong Kong feel like Beijing has not kept up its side of the bargain. And the U.S. has a lot of ability, both through Congress and also through Trump's negotiations with Xi, to put pressure on Beijing to get some of the things that Hong Kong wants.
So protesters are also calling on Washington to pass a bill supporting their push for democracy. Do we have any sense, are U.S. lawmakers thinking about getting involved?
They are. I think it is very popular in Congress. Hong Kong has always been seen as a bastion of openness, freedom of religion. It's in some ways a very Christian place, which plays very well to many members of Congress. And a lot of people want to have the influence in Hong Kong as a way to push back against what's happening in Beijing.
Well, last week, Hong Kong's leader announced the withdrawal of that extradition bill that you mentioned. Why is that move alone not quelling the protests? Because as we mentioned, that was really sort of the impetus for these weeks and weeks of demonstrations.
A lot of people are saying too little, too late. So even though it started the demonstrations, now people are realizing they have so many other frustrations with life in Hong Kong. And not all of it is political. There's a really, really intense wealth gap. And a lot of people in Hong Kong feel very frustrated at their inability to afford apartments, to afford schools for their children. But a lot of it is just feeling that Beijing is not they don't want to have the overlords in Beijing telling them what to do. And there's this really deep sense of frustration.
It seems as though this really was a catalyst for them to express these other grievances that sound like they have sort of been building up over time. What happens now? I mean, you've had this mixture of peaceful and then sometimes violent protests and counter sort of measures being taken by authorities. I mean, there doesn't appear to be any kind of end to this standoff. What happens here?
Such a great and important question. Chinese Chairman Xi Jinping has shown very little signs of what he's going to do. I mean, we've seen People's Armed Police, which is a Chinese paramilitary force, massing near the border. It's possible that they send in some form of paramilitary, some form of police to quell the protests. We know that October 1st is the 70th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China, and it's unlikely that Chinese leaders will allow Hong Kong to embarrass them on this very important day. But what are they going to do about it is really hard to say.
Yeah, I mean, if, for instance, U.S. officials, lawmakers decided to take some kind of action, how would that likely be received by the Chinese government?
I mean, in some ways, people in the Chinese government would see, aha, I told you so. We knew that the U.S. government was the black hand behind these protests and that this is just Hong Kong being anti-patriotic, not loving the motherland, and loving hostile foreign forces. So I think there's got to be some people in the leadership in Beijing who feel like this is a nice gift.
If it happens. All right, Isaac Stone-Fish. Isaac, great to see you. We'll continue to watch it. Thank you.